Well, there you are. Thank you very much indeed for downloading yet another Confessions podcast from your friends at Radio 2. Yes, it's another collection of pretty awful, terrible tales from the most sinful listenership known to man and woman. All seeking forgiveness from the Caring Collective. This week we have, in our concise collection, a twisted tennis tight spot, a Shawadi Wally squad sham. It all makes sense as we get through. A French ferry fright night, and it ended with a dancing dating disaster. Here it all comes. Tonight's seasonal confession comes from Audrey in Clevedon, name changed for fear of reciprocal acts of wanton sabotage. Father Simon and the Forgiveness Collective, I can no longer listen to the courageous admissions of my fellow listeners. Audrey in Clevedon,
Thanks.
Looking over at Matt again. My fellow listeners on my way home from work as they line up day after day pleading for your compassion and understanding. More to the point, the circumstances surrounding my unscrupulous behaviour are imminently about to present themselves in identical fashion. Therefore, my intention is to avert a repeat of said unscrupulous behaviour. Let me explain. The two most exciting weeks of the year for me take place at the All England Lawn Tennis and Croquet Club, Wimbledon. Yes, I'm a lifelong tennis fan. Each summer is planned around those 13 days of wall-to-wall tennis. I never go on holiday. I shift my work pattern to finish as early as I can in the day to dash home for my daily date with Sue Barker. Right, so not listening to this show then. The green grass of SW19 and all that lovely new white tennis wear. For over 13 years, my tennis hero has been the sublime Mr. Federer. As graceful as a gazelle, the 7 times champion has thrilled me for hours on end ever since his resounding first Wimbledon victory and Grand Slam title against Mark Philippoussis in 2003. Federer's pole position in my tennis heart has only ever been contested by a certain Mr. Andy Murray, not only the best British men's game player ever, but also a compatriot from my native Scotland. So every year I apply for tickets from the public ballot, and after years of disappointment I finally struck lucky. Father Simon, imagine my utter elation when I received notification that I had a pair of tickets to the 2015 championships for Friday the 10th of July, men's semi-final day. My tickets aren't for centre court, but no matter. I already resolved to camp out on Henman Hill because, to be honest, who would want to miss out on men's semis at Wimbledon, even if it is on the big screen? As the day approached, the knockout stages of the competition had delivered the ultimate lineup for the men's semis day. Novak Djokovic against Richard Gasquet, widely expected to be a shoo-in for Novak, followed by, you've guessed it, Andy Murray against Roger Federer. My loyalties would be stretched in all directions, but this time I would have to contain my shrieks and gasps to avoid disclosing my dual dilemma. No matter though, we were in. My day arrived and I set off with my adult son, Mark, himself also a lifelong fan. We were well prepared, not trusting the driest and hottest of Wimbledon fortnights. We had warm clothes, wet weather gear, sun cream, blanket, cool box, picnic, 2 punnets of strawberries, pot of double cream, a variety of chopped fruit, bag of ice, 2 plastic glasses, 4 bottles of lemonade and a bottle of that well-known summer cocktail drink. Now all we needed was somewhere to sit. By the time we got to the foot of Henman Hill, all we could see was a sea of seated people. I mean, we couldn't see a blade of grass for bodies everywhere. Not a single patch of green in sight. Then about an hour before the first match, in the full midday sun, we noticed a tiny gap about halfway up the hill near the middle. Perfect. We carefully picked our way through the legs and blankets of the expectant spectators, apologising and thanking as we went and approached the tiny space. We appraised that it was just about big enough for us to sit down cross-legged if we tucked the cool box closely in front of us. We mumbled more apologies and grateful thanks to our new neighbours who for the most part adjusted themselves slightly with good grace and charity. I say for the most part because, Father Simon, there were 2 exceptions. 2 guys in front of us, just slightly to the left, who had ignored our arrival and made no adjustments. We'll call these guys Norman and Gordon because they looked like a Norman and they looked like a Gordon. They'd obviously been sat there a while as they had good space secured by a large picnic blanket where they sat, legs stretched out comfortably in front of them with room to lie down should they wish to. Their patch was probably land registry worthy, it looked so owned. 2 rucksacks, 2 pairs of shoes neatly placed beside them on the grass, thereby extending their footprint to about 6 times the space that we were allowed to spend the next 4 to 6 hours, or maybe even 8, cramped hours. Notwithstanding the somewhat grim prospect, we laid our folded-up blanket on the tiny postage stamp piece of spare land available, and Mark scrunched down behind Norman. You know the way school assemblies used to be when hundreds of small kids were packed cross-legged onto the floor of a school hall? Well, like that, only worse. But assembly was only 20 minutes. We were now there for 2 hours. Djokovic and Gasquet were locked in battle high up on the screen. At ground level, we were in agony. I eyed Norman and Gordon's shoes right in front of me and accidentally nudged them forward a bit as I adjusted my position. The extra 10 centimetres afforded me a very welcome relaxation. After a polite gap, I did it again, and I did it again. Another 10 centimetres gained. Mark noticed what I was doing, threw me a supportive smile. Then I went too far, and Norman noticed. He threw me a scowl and tidied up his shoes, reclaiming my gains in a split second. I waited and then resumed attracting wry smiles from my neighbours. Not a word was spoken, and I pursued my land takeover silently and diligently in the spirit of grandmother's footsteps. In between gasps at the screen and discreet little nudges, I managed to enlarge our footprint. And then Norman would thwart my efforts with a defiant repositioning of his shoes. As the match played on, our own little head-to-head or foot-to-shoe battle played out on the hill. I gained, I lost. I broke serve, then I was broken back. But overall, I bagged the first set, and then the second, and despite a third set setback, I was ahead. First match over, Novak was through. Now for Murray and Federer. The main course, this was. In the 30 minutes or so between the matches, I took full advantage of Norman and Gordon's temporary absence from the battlefield to further consolidate my gains. By the time Andy and Roger were knocking up, I had successfully increased our patch of grass by at least 50%. This is fairly standard kind of occurrence for anyone who's gone to a festival, any kind of crowd. This is very important work, maximising your space. Simon, the match was a good distraction. Sadly for Andy, it was not his year. Happily for Roger, he was through to the final. By now, our picnic, what was left of it, looked sad and squishy. We started to clear up, and this, Simon, is where all decency and goodwill towards my fellow tennis fans deserted me. As we dealt with the sad picnic remnants, a mushy strawberry accidentally fell into one of Norman's pristine polished brogues. And then another one, and then a few more. I laughed that sort of oops laugh and nodded to Mark, who looked slightly horrified, but then also laughed the oops laugh. Encouraged, a few other manky pieces of fruit found their way accidentally to the shoe. To conceal my crime, I used a straw to hide the fruit in the toe space of the shoe, pushing it skillfully right to the end, out of sight, attracting yet more attention and sniggers from both Mark and our neighbours. Nods of approval and smiles endorsed my ruthless behaviour, and I concluded this was justice, and he deserved it, along with what was left of the double cream, which also ended up in his shoes, and some of the leftover pork pie.
What?
His shoes were full. It was then I realised we'd have to pack up and go pretty sharpish. We didn't want to be there when Norman put his shoes back on again, although it was tempting. It was time for our own Wimbledon exit. So clearly, as you can tell, the forgiveness is needed because I have again tickets for week 2 of Wimbledon this year, and I'm going to be camped on the hill again as the ballot only delivered court 2 tickets. I'm truly sorry for the parting gift I left Norman, who I'm sure is just an ordinary innocuous tennis fan, even if a bit over territorial, and didn't deserve mushy strawberries, pie and cream in his toes all the way home. But forgiveness also for those around me, including Mark, who allowed and encouraged this misdemeanour to take place. I promise I won't do it again, and will make sure I finish eating all my strawberries in future before they go mushy. Yours, Audrey in Clevedon, name changed, as I mentioned before. But this is so important to know how to get maximum territory. And when there is an oik in front of you who won't give way, I think strawberries in the shoe is quite a genteel way of getting your own back. But Sister Bobby is looking harsh to me.
We see Audrey from Clevedon. I was with you. I really was with you. When Norman and Gordon refused to give you any space, and also space taken up by not somebody's bottom enjoying the tennis, but by pairs of shoes just sitting there. He could have moved. So I was with you. Move his shoes. In fact, I'd have said, these yours, they need to go over there, right? And made more space for yourself. However, completely unforgiven for the fruit. You were just as bad as them. It was completely unnecessary, over the top.
Would you not say the earth is a commonwealth for all and that property is theft? No? Okay, fair enough.
Oh, bringing that in. Well done.
Well, a little bit of anarchy at Wimbledon always goes down quite well. Don't you think? That's what Ian Carter always used to say.
Yeah.
Anyway, what do you say there, Brother Matthew?
Well, I do love a bit of passive-aggressive. I'm just moving your... Instead of doing, as Bobby quite rightly says, what you should do is just say, these are your shoes, mate. Do you mind moving them? Thanks very much. And move them as you do it and don't wait for a response.
Take your travel rug away,
Yes,
sir.
do you mind, Gordon? But I also think you can, the sort of dropping the strawberries in the shoes, that's fine. Then we get to the cream.
Nice.
That's not an accident. And then the pork pie. It's, well, obviously, we're not even pretending this is an accident now.
It's a meal.
I am just putting all of my stuff into your shoes. So for that reason, I'm not going to forgive, because surely the joy of this would be if you were to try to make it look like an accident instead of just saying, I'm going to fill your shoes with all of my leftovers.
Dear Father Simon and the holy forgiving people, my name is Ken. Hello, Ken. I live in the Mansfield area of Nottinghamshire. My confession comes from 1985, and I was 25 years old. And he likes to be even more specific, does Ken. It takes place at the Commodore International in Nottingham. Myself and 5 friends had gone to watch Shawaddy and supporting acts that are associated with them. It was always a great night's entertainment in a great venue, and I'd been quite a few times, huge fan of the band, and had quite extensive knowledge of Shawaddy. The story starts after the cabaret finishes at about midnight, and the manager makes an announcement that the nightclub that most people make their way to just down the hall was closed for refurbishment. Boo, everybody goes. But the band had agreed that the customers were welcome to use the private club reserved for the act and their entourage. Hooray, everybody says. So we entered the club, and most of the band were actually there. Members of Shawaddy mixing with the public. Well, I couldn't believe it. I'm absolutely buzzing. I could never have imagined how good the night was going to get. We buy drinks and we stand almost in the centre of the room, and I'm telling my 5 friends the names of the band members, because there are lots of them, and I know everybody. I am in awe of what's happening. At this point, I'm going to name one of my friends, because his name is Jed, and to be honest, he's a bit of a joker. And everything is going fine. It's about 12:45 now, and we've just got about an hour and 15 before the place closes at 2 o'clock, so I toddle off to the loo. When I come back, 2 women are stood with my friends. I pick up my pint, I take a drink, and as I do, Jed says, "Oh, right, this is Ken. He used to be in Shawaddy." Right. Well, I couldn't take the glass away from my lips, and I'm just drinking, trying to work out how this is going to go. So the women say, "Really? How long were you in the band? I don't recognise you." So I reply, "Just over 2 years, but I left before they made it big." I'm just trying to play it down and play it cool. "Wow," she says, "you must be really gutted." No, not really," says Jed. He's a record producer now, and then he goes through a whole list of records that I've produced. Barbara Dixon, Marillion, Shakin' Stevens, and My Toot Toot by Denise LaSalle, which is my current project.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's just thought of a bunch of songs. I'm in a daze. Who is this man that I call a friend? Thanks, Jed. Do I really know him at all? Anyway, I'd noticed that both women had Shawaddy's greatest hits albums, which they'd obviously just bought. But as I glanced down, I could see signatures, and I had a terrible feeling I knew exactly what was going to come next. Simultaneously, they say, "Would you sign our Shawaddy's greatest hits album for us, please?" Well, good grief, I think this is becoming a bit of a farce, and I try to put them off by telling them I really am a nobody, which are the only true words I've spoken in the last 20 minutes. But they're having none of it, and so, reluctantly, I have to sign them both. "You must meet my daughter," says one, and I say, "Well, yes, I must. She's here somewhere, I'll go and find her." So she returns with a very attractive blonde, roughly my age. "This is Ken," says her mother. "He was in Shawaddy for 2 years." She's like, "Wow, that's amazing," eyes wide with amazement. And I'm like, "Yeah."
And I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "Oh, yeah."
In Under the Moon of Love, I do the aha line. "Wow, that's really great," she says. "Can we have a drink?"
Oh, yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, I'm actually enjoying being a member of Shawadi Wadi. This is cool. This could turn out all right. And then a sudden horror. As I look to the bar, she's only taken a seat right next to none other than Malk the Duke Allured, the drummer from 1973 to 1984, as you know.
Obviously.
OMG, 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 as we didn't say in those days. And they both turn to face me, and she points directly at me.
Oh, no.
And I keep eye contact for about a millionth of a second with Malk the Duke Allured, 1973 to 1984. My nonchalant look says, "Hi, Malk the drummer. Look, we were rockabilly rebels before it got too much, okay? But good days, yeah?" My insides say, "Get out, you're a muppet." So I shrink 6 inches and I whisper to Jed how we've been rumbled and we need to go sharpish, if not faster. I stay 6 inches shorter as I make my way for the door. I can't imagine what people thought, as I did a great impression of John Cleese in his Ministry of Funny Walks as I tried to exit the club with a degree of cool style. Father Simon, I need to ask for forgiveness for Jed. We are still good friends, but strangely never talk about this night. But I wouldn't want him forgiven. I need to ask forgiveness from the 2 ladies whose album I defaced, effectively, and who I deceived for the best part of an hour. They may or may not still be alive.
Right.
As I would say, they're probably around their 50s mark back then.
Oh, right. So, back then. Oh.
But if they are, the chances are they'll be Radio 2 listeners, says Ken. Ken, everyone is welcome. Everyone is welcome. Nigel Ogden fans and all. But if they are, the chances... Oh, yeah, ready to listeners. And they will instantly recall that night. And all I can say is if they go back into their album collection and they find their Shawadi Wadi's greatest hits, the bit that I signed, I'm a fraud. They can cross that out. Please forgive me. I'm very sorry. Yours, Kenneth, the Shawadi Wally is how he sounded.
Oh, well done.
How he sounded. Okay, Ken, very good. So, well, the moment presented itself. You obviously thought the night was going to go... swinging. He had the chance. He pretended to be in Shawadi Wadi. It's a crime against rock and roll. Let's see what Bobby makes of that.
This is 1985.
Yes.
Yeah? When Wham, Madonna were already big.
Yeah,
Adam
Shawadi
Ant
Wadi
was
were
big.
probably past their
well, yeah,
finest
so
moment.
that always interested me. Not this is Shawadi Wadi are great, and if you want to pretend to be the 26th member of Shawadi Wadi, then why not? In some ways. However, Ken, I don't actually believe that you should fake identities to try and get girls. That's the big thing, really, and it's not on.
Well,
We've done this before. Do you remember with the guy who pretended to be French and he had about 7 women on the go? It's not on. It's
You
just
can see the
not
temptation,
on.
though.
What? No. You see, the thing is, if you've got nothing about you, then of course you have to pretend to be something that you're not.
Yep.
But really, Ken, work on yourself. Not forgiven.
Yeah, Ken, work on yourself, loser.
Wow.
That's the words of compassion from Sister Bobby.
My standards are slightly lower. I remember once going to a gig in Spain.
Did you pretend to be in Wham?
No, it was New Model Army I went to see.
Cool.
And I went out with them afterwards and I pretended to be in the band. And not very successful on that
cool.
front.
Why did you pretend to
Because I was
be
a
in
massive New Model
Army?
I am a massive New Model Army fan. And so...
Who did you pretend to? The band? They
No,
must have-
because we're trying to get into clubs. And I'd say, I'm with the band. And it worked. Got into the clubs. So, yeah. Anyway.
Did you change your name?
To Matt the Leveller. No, sadly not.
That would have been great.
Yes, but nobody's been harmed by this. I'm sure these ladies cherished their album and had a memory of a great night meeting your man from Shawadi Wadi. So I'm going to say definitely forgiven, because given the opportunity, we would all do the same as indeed.
What, we'd all
I
pretend
have.
that we were in Shawadi Wadi?
Or New Model Army, or any other of those great pop beat combos.
I think Ken Bruce once pretended to be in Twisted Sister. And he got away. And he got away with it.
I bet he did. Yeah.
Tonight's comes from Rick. That's Rick, Bobby.
Thank you.
Okay, let me know when you got that
I was
written
all
down.
over it. I
Okay.
was there.
Dear Father Simon and the Collective, I finally decided to write and ask for forgiveness from you. Also my son, who was a 20-year-old freeloading student at the time, and the French lady we called Monique. My son Tom had recently had his kneecap replaced and was on crutches, so we decided we would take the 24-hour ferry to Spain and the rest of the family would fly and meet us at Alicante. This was the plan. All went okay. The story really starts as we were waiting to board the ferry. A rather attractive lady was in the queue just in front of us. Judging by her car registration and her appearance, we deduced that she was definitely French, and we decided we would call her Monique. Ferry travel is quite dull. There is nothing to do apart from looking at who's travelling on board with you, and on 2 occasions, when she looked around, I happened to be staring at her. You know when that happens? Feeling my discomfort, my son pipes up, "She's clocked you twice now, Dad." She's seen you looking at her. You're in trouble. I decided to bury my head in a book until we boarded. Once on board, we found our cabins. It should have been cabin in the singular, but my son didn't want to share a cabin with his dad, so I had to book 2. Well, he did have a new knee and everything. I asked for 2 together, but as I booked late, our cabins were a few numbers apart. I didn't take much notice as I was tired after our 7-hour drive from Manchester. After a short nap, we met in the lounge and decided to explore the ship. We went to the tourist desk, and there was Monique. We went to the coffee lounge, and there was Monique. There didn't seem to be a place on the ship where we didn't run into Monique, who was beginning to look slightly worried. Another gem from my son. She thinks you're stalking her, Dad. That's what sons are for. Now, there's not a lot to do on a 24-hour cruise to Santander, so inevitably we ended up in the bar, where the idea was to have a couple of beers and go for a meal. Surprisingly, the beer on this French-owned ship was exceptionally good, and I ended up having several more beers than I had originally intended. We made our way into dinner. Our table was next to Monique.
Oh, no.
I nipped to the gents and left my son to order drinks. As a freeloading student, he had no hesitation in ordering a €30 bottle of wine, along with another couple of beers for the road or the water. Dinner over and feeling a little bit tipsy, I made my way to my cabin, got undressed and stumbled into bed. A couple of hours later, with a full bladder and bleary eyes, I got up to use the convenience. The sea was a little bumpy and I stumbled about my cabin. I grabbed the door handle to the loo and walked in.
Oh, no.
As I started to open my eyes, looking for the urinal, imagine my horror, quelle horreur, when I realised I had completely misjudged which door I had opened and found myself stark naked in the corridor. Absolute sheer panic sets in. The only thing I could do was to knock on my son's door for help. But which cabin was it?
Oh, no.
I reckon it had to be one of the 2 further down the corridor. I tapped gently. There was no answer. I tapped again slightly harder. Still no answer. I now rapped the door harder, determined he was going to open up. I'd pay for him, this freeloader. Come on, open up! Finally, the door started to open ever so slightly. And Father Simon, this moment still fills every waking moment of my life. A shocked, frightened face slowly starts to peep around the door. And yes, you've guessed it, it wasn't my son's room. It was, of course, Monique's room. The slight scream she gave seemed to echo around the ship. Filled with the fear of spending time in a French prison, I tried apologising in the little French that I knew. The door slammed shut, and I was still naked in the corridor. After what seemed like an eternity, my son eventually opened the door to his cabin. The look on his face was even worse than the one on Monique's face. But obviously, I have to beg forgiveness from Monique, who I presume is still traumatised, from my son, obviously scarred by the incident, and also from the steward, who had to come and let me, the guy with just a bedsheet on, back into my cabin, shaking his head and mumbling something about the crazy English. I now use Eurotunnel. It's a lot safer. Rick, thank you very much, D. There you go. It's tonight's tale. Very good. Poor Monique, you can see, it is one of those things, it's just, you're looking up and she sees you, oh no, I know we're at the next table in the same coffee, and I know I'm forgotten my clothes. It's all a coincidence, Monique. That's what it is. What do you say, Sister Bobby?
Women everywhere are sighing a sigh of relief that, I take Eurotunnel, I'm not on the boat, actually. There's nothing more terrifying than a naked man at your door, is there? A strange naked man.
I don't know. Tell us more, Bobby.
Well,
Is that right?
The thing is, it seems that there are a lot of men in public, when they're staying away from home and in kind of public places,
yes,
that they don't think of wrapping something round them when they go into a shared bathroom.
Is that right?
I'm just thinking, why are you all running naked around hotels?
Where do you go on holiday?
It's just that we have so many stories about just grab a bath towel. It's not that difficult. I don't care how many beers have you had. Look, Rick, to be quite honest, it's a feeble story, and it just happened that every time Monique looked at you, you were looking at her, which means the odds are you were looking at her all the time to get her catch it. I think, Rick, you're not forgiven. Grab a towel next time. Wear your pyjamas.
Brother Matthew.
Yes, I've done that Santander ferry, and it was grim. And also,
Was Monique there?
No, she wasn't. But anything would have livened the mood. That it was awful. And also, she wouldn't have thought you were following it because there's nowhere else to go. You're either in the bar, or you're in the restaurant, or you're on the deck, or you're in your cabin. There's nowhere else to go. So you'd be stalking everyone. Who are these people who insist on sleeping with nothing on? And that's I'm full square behind Bobby on this. All your bohemian lifestyle of thinking, oh no, I don't want anything on my body while I'm sleeping because it interferes with me aura. Well, no one's buying it, and it turns out society's conventions have come back and slapped you on the face. And so more fool you for your I've got to be naked when I'm in bed. So yes, that means not forgiven.
So it was interfering with his aura.
Yeah, that's what they all say.
Is
all
that
these
what it
people
was?
Oh yeah.
Is that what you call it
no,
in your house?
I need to be like nature.
You need to wrap up your auras, I think.
Okay, all right. Gloria sends in tonight's confession. That's Gloria, Bobby.
Thank you.
Gloria.
Listen, I can
G-L-O-R-I. Hey,
I can spell. It's not a spelling test.
just checking. Dear Simon and the magnanimous menagerie, my tale begins some 10 years ago in the beautiful city of York, when my then partner and I split up. It wasn't one of those modern and amicable partings.
Excellent.
It wasn't a conscious uncoupling or whatever. This was a good old-fashioned detachment brought on by nothing other than serial infidelity by him. So after 4 years...
Unforgiven.
Okay, that's it. Thanks very much. Anyway, after 4 years of rebuilding, I started online dating. Right. The entire process of dating for the first time in decades was not unenjoyable. True, you needed to commit several hours each weekend to complete strangers who, for the most part, you probably wouldn't vote for, employ, or bring home to meet your father. And trust me, I met some choice characters. But just occasionally, you met someone who made you laugh. And so it was with Colin. By the way, Colin is absolutely categorically not his real name. But anyway, Colin and I met in a local pub. We got on swimmingly. He was older than me by quite a bit. In fact, he'd been retired for a few years. But he was full of conversation, wit and humour, and had a little sparkle in his eye. Despite the age gap, I felt this was going to be a fun Saturday night date, and as we came to the end of our second glass of wine, I suggested we move on to another bar a few streets away that I knew had a band playing. After all, Colin had expressed a love of music, and I had shared my love of dancing. It seemed like a good idea. Colin was a little reluctant, but I was... What?
No, go on.
But I was full of wine and bravado, so I cajoled him into it. As we were walking down the street, I became aware of Colin limping ever so slightly. I thought of asking him if there was a problem, but decided I didn't want to. Stop it! I didn't want to embarrass him, so I ignored it, and I strode on. We eventually arrived at the new pub, being much further away than I actually remembered, and took another glass of wine. The band was excellent. It was a commitment-style 9-piece play-up beat band kind of tune arrangement, designed to get the audience dancing, and dance they did. Colin and I stood at the side amongst the mostly 20-somethings and a handful of trendy middle-aged couples enjoying what looked like their first weekend out since their children had left for university. We admired their joyful dancing and began tapping our toes enthusiastically. With hindsight, my toe tapping was more enthusiastic than Colin's, but no matter. Yeah. I was determined to dance, come what may. I took the bull between the horns and suggested we hit the tiny dance floor and get on down. Colin laughed and shook his head. No, I'm fine, he said. You go ahead. He said this politely in his lovely soft Welsh Valleys accent, Simon.
Oh, good.
Well,
excellent.
I'm sure he did.
Brilliant.
And how nice for you.
Yeah.
However, it continues. It is with utter shame that I recall I used every weapon in my armoury, says Gloria. I persuaded him that dancing was the single best thing he could do to make this the absolute best night of my life. In other words, I bullied him into it. I can't remember whether he actually verbally agreed to dance, but I do remember pulling him onto the dance floor in full sight of the band, the growing audience and the bar staff, and witnessing his mock-amused, half-terrorised grin as he stumbled behind me onto the centre of the dance floor. Well, I boogied with everything I had, Simon. I loved every second of it. I recalled moves that were only really fashionable in 1985. Whatever they were. I attempted moves that I imagine young people did these days. In my mind, I was Beyoncé in his Sasha Fierce mode, and I didn't have a care in the world. Everyone was jumping up and down. I turned to look at Colin, whose feet were rooted to the spot, but whose hips were doing a great job at wiggling from side to side, like he was dancing to The Bump by Kenny. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Matt looks puzzled.
No, but it sounds great.
He began to relax and enjoy himself, and I remember feeling brilliant that my act of persuasion had worked. The music built to a crescendo, arms were flung in the air, Colin's hip wiggling became slightly more energetic, and he began to stomp his feet up and down with happy abandon. Unfortunately, that, I'm afraid, is when his leg fell off. It wasn't his whole leg. It was just half a leg. Obviously, it wasn't his real leg. It was a prosthetic one, but it was quite a shock.
Yeah.
Not just for poor Colin, but for the rest of the dancers who stopped to witness the half leg appear from the end of a trouser and slide across the floor.
Don't laugh, Matt.
It was also a shock for the audience and the bar staff, who stood aghast, and worst of all, the band, who stopped playing almost immediately. There was silence apart from the sound I made of sucking in my breath. I raised both hands over my mouth and stared at poor old Colin, whilst another younger dancer came to his aid. I can't recall much about the rest of the evening. I think my mind has erased it, but I did get an email from Colin some months later thanking me for an interesting night.
Yeah.
He explained, get this, he explained that he was trying out a new prosthetic leg, but the pin fixing had broken. He then wished me luck in my search for a man and told me he'd met a nurse from Rio and was about to emigrate to Brazil.
Good for you.
Good for him. How about that?
Yeah.
I was relieved and happy that he'd met someone, but I'm afraid I still feel the need for clemency. I had several opportunities to change course and save his embarrassment, but I ploughed on like a bull on the dance floor. So I'm asking you and your lovely team for mercy. I seek forgiveness from Colin for my terrible insensitivity, for not picking up all the screamingly obvious cues. And clues. I also seek forgiveness from the band, the other dancers, and the audience for being the catalyst behind the evening's interruption. I hope you'll find it in your hearts to absolve me of my shame. I have since met a nice man, by the way, says Gloria, a little younger than Colin, who recently suggested we start salsa classes together. I've yet to decide whether this is a good idea. Perhaps your response and your team's response will help me decide. Well, Gloria, thank you very much indeed. We do get a few online dating confessions, but this is a particularly memorable one, I think. And I like the fact that Colin said, thanks for an interesting date. By the way, I've met a woman from Rio and I'm emigrating.
Yeah. See ya.
See ya, bye. Thanks very much. Don't need your commitment-style pub anymore. Sister Bobby.
I love this. Thing is, Gloria, it is all innocent from your part, and you didn't want to ask too many questions when he was limping, because you don't, you're all open and you're kind of, trying to be
First or second
accepting,
date, yeah.
and it's absolutely fine. And also, he maybe should have said, look, you need to know, dancing's not my thing because I'm trying out a new leg.
You don't say that right at the very beginning.
Yes,
do you?
well, it's a great opener. It's a great icebreaker, isn't it? But let's face it, Gloria, you didn't break his heart. You broke his leg, and actually, that's probably better. And it all ended up really well. Actually, I like the idea of Colin, who said, not Colin, of your new guy who's invited you salsa dancing. Any couple who dances together stays together, apparently.
Well, I think, you see...
Matt doesn't, because Matt doesn't dance.
This ends up happily every which way, actually. Anyway.
It does. Yeah, no, everyone comes out okay. I don't dance at all. So I can empathise with Colin and his not wanting to dance. But really, Colin should have just said, no, I'm not dancing. It's not going to happen. And no matter what she was saying to try and entice him onto the dance floor, it wasn't going to work. Because I don't dance. I'm not dancing. I don't dance. You go off and enjoy yourself. I'm not going to dance. But it doesn't matter for Colin now because he's on the Copacabana with your nurse in Rio, living it up. So I'm going to forgive.
Well, they were this week's confessions. I don't think you forgave anybody, really. Not really. If you've got a shadowy secret and you fancy just telling me and no one else, I promise I won't be broadcasting it. confessions@bbc.co.uk. More in a week, and don't forget you can listen to all of our shows from the last 30 days on the iPlayer. If you find yourself at a loose end and you just think, I know, I could do with a bit of Monday's Book Club. Which was False Hearts by Laura Lamb. She was in the studio. Tuesday we had Ray Mears talking about his new TV series. MasterChef's Greg Wallace was in on Wednesday talking about eating well for less and that kind of stuff. And while you're in the mood, Nigel served up spiced vegetables and paneer cheese with a cashew and quinoa crumble. He's a man of the people, you know. Anyway, the details can be found on the Ready 2 website. You have for Thursday's episode page, and you toggle down until you hit the recipe. It could take you hours, but what else have you got to do? Anyway, if you've got to this point of the podcast, I think you should just tweet the magic words rhubarb crumble. Thank you.